Imagine pulling up next to a massive car from the 1950s, tons of chrome, an elegant appearance, maybe even looking slow, and then it simply disappears ahead of you, because that's the most interesting part about true sleepers. They don't look fast. They don't try to intimidate. Many of them weren't even considered sports cars in their own era, but they hid absurd engines, unexpected power, and performance capable of humiliating many muscle cars that would appear years later. And honestly, that makes them even more impressive. So in this video, you're going to discover some of the most absurd sleepers of the 1950s, cars that almost nobody expected, but that could leave almost everyone behind. 1955 Chrysler C300. This car looks like it was built for wealthy businessmen, but in reality, it was basically a NASCAR car in disguise, and that makes it one of the most important sleepers of the entire decade. Because the C300 doesn't try to look aggressive. It doesn't have exaggerated air intakes. It doesn't look like a race car. And visually, it still communicates luxury and sophistication. But underneath that elegant appearance, there was something completely different. Imagine the context. Mid-1950s. American manufacturers beginning to realize the impact racing had on sales. NASCAR growing rapidly, and Chrysler deciding to bring part of that experience directly into a road car. The result was this: a massive American coupe, refined, enormous, but equipped with one of the most serious engines in the entire industry. Under the hood, the 331 Humiliate produced around 300 horsepower, and in 1955, that was insanity. Especially in a car that didn't look built for speed. And that's exactly what makes it so special. Because the C300 didn't need to look fast. It simply was fast. Very fast. In fact, this car quickly became one of the fastest American cars of its era, exceeding 130 miles per hour and dominating stock car competitions. And that shocked a lot of people. There's an important detail. The C in the name literally stood for coupe, and the 300 was a direct reference to the engine's horsepower, something extremely bold for 1955, and that helped build the reputation of Chrysler's future letter cars lineup. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. An original Chrysler C300 can easily exceed $100,000, especially in well-preserved examples. 1958 Pontiac Bonneville fuel injection. This car looks like pure American luxury, but it hid something almost nobody expected in 1958, electronic fuel injection, and that already made it different from the very beginning, because while many cars of the era still relied on far more traditional setups, Pontiac decided to push the Bonneville to another level, and honestly, very few people understood how serious this car really was. Imagine the scene, a massive coupe, covered in chrome, with all the visual excess typical of the late 1950s. It definitely doesn't look like a car built to embarrass others in a straight line. But that's the trap, because underneath all that elegance, there was a monster. The 370 cubic inch V8 with Rochester fuel injection produced around 310 horsepower. And in 1958, that was extremely serious, especially in a car that didn't try to look sporty. And that's where the Bonneville becomes the perfect sleeper, because visually, it looks like a luxurious grand tourer, but when it accelerated, the story changed completely. In terms of performance, it could exceed 130 miles per hour, while also delivering far stronger acceleration than anyone expected from such a large and refined car. And that surprised a lot of people. There's an important detail. The Bonneville fuel injection was one of the first American luxury cars to use such an advanced injection system for the era, something very few manufacturers were doing at the time, and that made it even more special. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1958 Pontiac Bonneville fuel injection can easily exceed $80,000, especially in original and well-preserved examples. 1957 Studebaker Golden Hawk. This car looks elegant until you hear the supercharger, and that's where everything changes, because the Golden Hawk is exactly the type of car that would fool a lot of people in the 1950s. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a refined American coupe, different, maybe even more focused on style than performance. But no, this car was serious. Imagine the context. Studebaker trying to stay relevant against giants like Ford Motor Company, Chevrolet, and Chrysler, and realizing it needed to do something different, something that grabbed attention, but not only visually, and the answer was brutal. Take a massive V8 and add a supercharger. The supercharged 289 V8 produced around 275 horsepower. But once again, the number doesn't tell the whole story, because the Golden Hawk was relatively lightweight compared to many American cars of the same period, and that made it absurdly fast, especially in acceleration. Visually, the car still carries that typical mid-1950s elegance. Smooth lines, balanced proportions, refined details, but hiding something much more serious underneath. And that's exactly the beauty of the car, because nobody expected something like this to be that quick. There's a key detail. The Golden Hawk quickly gained a reputation for its power-to-weight ratio, something that allowed the car to compete directly with models that looked far more visually aggressive, and that turned it into a genuine surprise on wheels. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A supercharged Studebaker Golden Hawk can easily exceed $70,000, depending on condition and originality. And now I want to know something. Which sleeper feels the most absurd to you so far? The luxurious Chrysler, the fuel-injected Bonneville, or this supercharged Studebaker that almost nobody expected? Let me know in the comments. 1957 Chrysler 300C. This car doesn't look like a sleeper until you understand what it really was. Because at first glance, the 300C looks exactly like what you'd expect from a large American luxury coupe of the 1950s. Tons of chrome, an elegant presence, massive dimensions, nothing that immediately suggests an absurdly fast car. And that's the mistake. Imagine the context. Late 1950s, most people still associating speed with lightweight sports cars or European performance machines, while Chrysler was doing something completely different. Take a luxury car and give it a monstrous engine. The result was this: a refined, comfortable, sophisticated car. But hiding underneath the hood, a massive 392 Hemi 5.8 producing around 375 horsepower. 375 horsepower in 1957. And that completely changes the conversation. Because this wasn't a car designed to look aggressive, it was a car designed to destroy highways effortlessly, and that made it far more intimidating. Visually, the 300C communicates authority more than sportiness. The lines are clean, elegant, very typical of American luxury from the era. But that's exactly why. Nobody expected how fast it could really be. In terms of performance, it could exceed 145 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest American cars of the entire decade. And it did all of that while looking like an executive luxury car. There's a key detail. Chrysler's Letter Cars series quickly built a reputation for combining premium luxury with performance that many sports cars simply couldn't match. And the 300C was one of the best examples of that formula. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1957 Chrysler 300C Hemi can easily exceed $100,000, especially in original configurations. 1957 Rambler Rebel. This car looks like the most ordinary one on this entire list. And that's exactly why it's one of the most dangerous. Because the Rambler Rebel was never created to attract attention. It doesn't have an aggressive design. It doesn't look sporty. It doesn't visually communicate speed. Honestly, it looks like a simple 1950s family sedan. But that's exactly where the trap is. Imagine the context. 1957. Most people still associating fast cars with large, expensive models, packed with chrome and massive engines. And then American Motors Corporation shows up with this. A relatively discreet sedan, but hiding underneath the hood, a powerful 327 V8 producing around 255 horsepower. And that doesn't sound outrageous today. But back then, it was extremely serious. Today, an original Rambler Rebel can easily exceed $60,000, depending on condition and originality. 1959 Buick Electra 225. This car looks gigantic, heavy, and far too luxurious to actually be fast. And that's exactly the problem, because most people would underestimate this car immediately just by looking at it. And they would be completely wrong. Imagine the scene. Late 1950s, enormous tail fins, tons of chrome, luxurious interiors, cars becoming longer and more extravagant every year. And in the middle of all that, Buick decides to place a monstrous V8 underneath one of the brand's most refined cars. The result was the Electra 225, a car that looks built purely for comfort, but hiding much more than it appears to. Visually, it communicates pure American luxury. The massive proportions, the imposing presence, the exaggerated 1959 styling. Nothing here looks designed for speed. But underneath the hood, the story was completely different. The massive 401 nailhead V8 produced around 325 horsepower, along with an absurd amount of torque. And that made this giant accelerate much harder than anyone expected, because the Electra wasn't lightweight. But it definitely wasn't slow, not even close. On the highway, this car could maintain extremely high speeds with shocking ease, almost as if the weight simply disappeared. And that surprised a lot of people. There's an important detail. The name 225 referred directly to the car's enormous overall length, reinforcing even more the idea that this car was built for luxury and presence. And that's exactly why it works so perfectly as a sleeper, because nobody expected something this massive to be that fast. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1959 Buick Electra 225 can easily exceed $50,000, depending on condition and originality. And now, I want to know something. What type of sleeper do you find more interesting? The discreet cars like the Rambler Rebel, or these enormous luxury monsters hiding absurd engines underneath? Let me know in the comments. 1956 Packard Caribbean. This car looks built purely for luxury, but it was hiding far more than it appeared to, because the Packard Caribbean perfectly represents the kind of sleeper that fooled absolutely everyone. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a massive American luxury convertible. Refined, elegant, designed for slowly cruising through neon-lit boulevards covered in chrome. But underneath all that elegance, there was a monster. Imagine the context. Mid-1950s, Packard trying to remain among the most prestigious brands in the United States, investing heavily in extreme luxury, technology, comfort, but also realizing that power was becoming increasingly important. And the answer was this car, a massive convertible, sophisticated, filled with refined details, but equipped with one of the most serious engines the brand had ever produced. The gigantic 374 V8 produced around 310 horsepower, an extremely strong number for 1956, especially in a car that definitely did not look sporty. And that's exactly the beauty of the Caribbean, because nobody expected something this elegant to accelerate like that. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1956 Packard Caribbean can easily exceed $100,000, depending on condition and originality. It isn't the lightest, but probably it's one of the most refined sleepers on this entire list. 1957 Chevrolet 150 Black Widow. This car looks like a taxi, and that's exactly why it was so dangerous. Because the Chevrolet 150 Black Widow represents the ultimate 1950s sleeper. It didn't have exaggerated chrome, it didn't look luxurious, it didn't communicate performance the way other cars from the era did. Honestly, it looked like the most basic Chevrolet you could buy. But underneath that completely ordinary appearance, there was something very different. Imagine the context. Chevrolet wanting to dominate NASCAR, understanding that it needed a much more competitive car, and developing special racing-oriented versions of the humble Chevrolet 150. And that's how the Black Widow was born, a visually discreet car, but genuinely built to run. The strategy was simple: make it look normal, and it worked perfectly. Because nobody looked at this car expecting extreme performance. But under the hood, the story changed completely. The 283 V8 with Rochester fuel injection could produce around 283 horsepower. Yes, 1 horsepower per cubic inch in 1957, something absurdly advanced for the era. And combined with the lighter Chevrolet 150 body, the result was brutal. This car wasn't trying to intimidate visually, it was trying to win, and that made it terrifyingly effective. There's a key detail. Many of these cars were used directly in NASCAR competition, and they quickly gained a reputation for incredible performance and an outstanding power-to-weight ratio, and that helped turn them into legends among people who truly understood fast cars. Because while everyone else was looking at chrome and tail fins, this thing was quietly humiliating much more expensive machinery. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. An authentic Chevrolet 150 Black Widow can easily exceed $200,000, depending on originality and racing history. 1958 DeSoto Adventurer. This car looks exaggerated, but honestly, it was much faster than it had any right to be, because the Adventurer perfectly represents late 1950s American excess. Enormous tail fins, massive amounts of chrome, absurd dimensions. Everything looks designed purely to attract attention. And that's exactly why almost nobody expected the level of performance hiding underneath. Imagine the context. DeSoto trying to position itself as something more exclusive and sophisticated within the Chrysler Group, while still embracing America's growing obsession with horsepower. And the result was this: a massive coupe, elegant, extremely flashy, but equipped with an engine that transformed it into something completely different. Under the hood, the gigantic 361 V8 produced around 345 horsepower. 345 horsepower in 1958, and that immediately placed the Adventurer among the fastest American cars of the entire era, especially considering how it looked, because visually, it seems heavy. It looks far more concerned with luxury and style than with speed, but once it accelerated, the story changed completely. The torque was brutal, the response immediate, and the car could reach speeds most people simply didn't expect from something this large and extravagant. And that's where another perfect sleeper is born, because the Adventurer completely fooled anyone judging it purely by appearance. There's an important detail. DeSoto produced the Adventurer in relatively low numbers compared to many other American brands of the period, and that helped turn it into one of the forgotten giants of America's golden era. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1958 DeSoto Adventurer can easily exceed $80,000 depending on condition and originality. 1957 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. This car looks like it came straight out of a science fiction movie, and honestly, that's exactly why so many people didn't take it seriously. Because the Turnpike Cruiser was excessive even by 1950 standards. Enormous windshields, endless chrome, futuristic details everywhere. A body that looks far more focused on visual impact than on any kind of performance. But that was the mistake, because underneath all that extravagant styling, there was far more power than anyone imagined. Imagine the context. Late 1950s, America obsessed with the future. Airplanes, rockets, technology, and Mercury trying to turn that futuristic vision into a production car. And the result was this monster. A gigantic coupe filled with outrageous details, but powered by a strong 368 V8, producing around 290 to 310 horsepower, depending on the version. And that was far more serious than it appeared, because visually, this car looks far too heavy to be fast. It seems like nothing more than a giant American cruiser built for comfort. But out on the highway, it shocked people, especially at high speeds. And that makes it a very different kind of sleeper compared to the others on this list. Because here, the disguise wasn't understated elegance. It was absolute excess. There's an important detail. The Turnpike Cruiser was specifically designed to represent the American car of the future, incorporating technologies and styling features that were extremely advanced for the era, and that caused people to pay far more attention to the styling than to the car's actual performance. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Mercury Turnpike Cruiser can easily exceed $60,000 depending on condition and originality. And when you look at all these cars together, you begin to understand something very interesting about the 1950s. speed still didn't have a defined shape. Because today, when we think about fast cars, we imagine something aggressive, low, sporty, clearly built for performance. But in the 1950s, many of the fastest cars looked exactly the opposite. And honestly, that makes them even more interesting than many traditional sports cars. Now, I want to know something. Which sleeper was the most absurd in the entire video? The one that looked the least capable of speed, but surprised you the most once you discovered what it could actually do? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see another type of completely unexpected sleeper, you need to watch this video about the fastest wagons of the 1950s. Because yes, even family wagons from that era could be absurdly fast, and some of them were far wilder than anyone imagined. See you there.